The New Orleans Saints are going to need another body in the linebacker room and the wide receiver whose name you need to know before Saturday's preseason matchup. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me every day over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Crescent City Sports, Tuesday on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be answering your questions from the earlier live show that took place right after day 12 of New Orleans Saints training camp. We're going to be taking a look at what player is in line for a breakout year after the first couple weeks of camp are now in the books. But first, we're going to dive into the wide receiver whose name you need to know, Kirk Merritt, going into the preseason matchup, and what his coach and one of the guys that's thrown passes to him the most over the course of training camp had to say about him in today's presser. And first, we need to talk about the linebacker core for the New Orleans Saints because there's a lot of concern around depth behind the starters. So let's start off there because this is really the biggest story for right now. Demario Jackson, New Orleans Saints rookie linebacker, drafted out of App State. He was a fifth-round selection for the Saints. You may remember a while back, we had Emory Hunt from CBS Sports HQ here on the show who gave his nod of confidence for Demario Jackson being a guy that could potentially end up starting next to Demario Davis in 2022. Now, things weren't necessarily panning out that way over the course of training camp. It was pretty clear that Davis and Pete Werner were going to be the guys, the starters there, along with Kaden Elliss over on the strong side. But now, with Jackson headed to injured reserve, and no, we don't know yet, although hopefully we get an update here soon. I know some folks have asked. We haven't got an update yet on exactly what it was that happened to Demario Jackson that sent him to injured reserve, but we do hope that all is well. But now with him heading to injured reserve, his season is over. Him going to injured reserve during the preseason means he's done, right? Like, it's not a situation where you go on injured reserve for 3 games or anything like that. That's only the in-season rules. So this is unfortunate for Demario Jackson, who did have a lot of promise, but bona fide leader, guy that could play sideline to sideline, attack downhill very easily, which would have made him a core special teamer for the Saints. But it does beg the question now, what do the Saints do at linebacker? Because it's very clear that they're starting to thin at the lines here. I mean, again, behind Demario Davis, Pete Werner, and Kaden Elliss, who are your far and away starters, the other guys that you have on your list here are going to be Zack Baun, Eric Wilson, who I think provides you fantastic depth. I think he's a shoo-in to make the roster. They brought in Chase Hansen, who the Saints have always really liked a lot. They invested in him coming out of college as an undrafted free agent years ago, and he's consistently found his way back to the roster and back to the organization. And he's one of the few players on the roster that has middle linebacker experience behind Demario Davis. Then you've got, some other guys like Nephi Sewell as well as Isaiah Pryor. And that's kind of it, right? So you have to figure out, and of course, Zack Baun is on the roster as well. And so you kind of have to figure out where you go from here with this unit, because Zack Baun hasn't been able to become that coverage linebacker for you. But Eric Wilson has been able to hold that role pretty well throughout training camp, has played really well in the run game as well. So you're really just trying to figure out who's kind of going to be your 6th linebacker as a part of all that. And that's where I think oftentimes people forget about Andrew Dowell. Andrew Dowell, number 50, who is another guy just like Chase Hansen that this team likes a lot and has some good speed, really good click and close ability, plays downhill very well, good tackler, secure tackler, great special teamer. That's where I think that Andrew Dowell comes into play. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Ross, what about Roquan Smith? Saints aren't looking to pay a starting linebacker right now. They're looking for depth at linebacker. They have their starters. They're good in terms of what they have there. Now, if there's an injury to one of those guys, then sure, maybe you do go out there and try to move some assets and find the money to eventually have to pay a Roquan Smith unless you just want him on a 1-year rental. But outside of that, there's no real reason to go after a guy like that and ship off your assets. So it makes a lot more sense right now for the Saints instead to go out and maybe look at the free agent landscape again. Does a guy like Joe Schobert just get desperate enough to where he's like, all right, I'll take a job? Like, if it's depth, if it's starting, whatever, I'll take a job. They worked out Anthony Hitchens. They also worked out John Bostic. Again, they didn't like those guys as much as they liked Kiko Alonso to bring Kiko Alonso in, so that should tell you something. But, I mean, you might as well bring in and look for other options there. And the Saints have not been shy about doing that, right? We've seen them bring in guys like Meeks. We've seen them bring in guys like Jordan Brown. We've seen them bring in TJ Carter, for instance, even Kiko Alonso himself, and of course Chase Hansen. Like, they've never stopped adding to this team over the course of the offseason and over the course of training camp. So expect them to continue to do exactly that. But it just might not be a big name like a Roquan Smith, because it's not really what they're looking for, right? Like, they're very clearly looking for a middle linebacker, but they're looking for middle linebacker depth. Demario Davis is your middle linebacker. Pete Werner is your will or your weak side linebacker. And Kaden Elliss is your starting strong side linebacker or Sam linebacker. They're good there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them go out there and make some more moves at linebacker, but at least they're not in a situation here to where they're looking for a starter. They're just looking to fill out depth at the bottom of the roster. But not at the bottom of the roster, but like at that part of the depth chart, right? They're looking for depth right now. And they're in a situation where they have some good options on the field. I think probably my favorites are Chase Hansen, Andrew Dowell, as well as Eric Wilson, who has been somebody I've been championing this entire offseason thus far. That's your three depth players behind Demario Davis, Pete Werner, and Kaden Elliss. You're in a pretty good spot there, but if you decide you want to bring in more competition, which is what this offseason has been all about for the New Orleans Saints, is pushing players by generating competition, and that makes a ton of sense for them to move ahead with that plan. And they've already looked at some linebackers, or maybe they can pull the trigger, and maybe we see a new number running around in the Saints practice facility tomorrow on Wednesday. All right, coming up next, Kirk Merritt, the name you need to know, the name you need to remember, as well as another fellow wide receiver that you're going to want to keep your eyes on come Saturday up against the Houston Texans. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And you're also going to hear from Dennis Allen and Ian Book, guys that are very close to Kirk Merritt, talking about what it is that they have seen from him so far. We'll break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, your number one source for all your sports wagering needs, sports wagering information, podcasts, and of course, more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Win totals, player props, player performance props, even position battles across the NFL you can get in on. You can also check out end-of-year awards, like if you think Lamar Jackson might have a sneaky good year, could he be a guy in the running for MVP all of a sudden once again? There's a whole bunch for you to check out. And I'll take Lamar Jackson. I think last time I saw it was like plus 1,100, like 11-1 odds or something. Like, I'll take that. That's easy when it comes to the opportunity for him to be MVP of the 2022 NFL season. Or maybe you're really confident about your New Orleans Saints because Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston are both set for comeback player of the year. They're in the top 3, the both of them. So you can get in on that and much more over at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day every day, for joining us for our live shows every day, for being here for our pre-records in the evening. We're having a lot of fun here on the show, so thank you for all of your support. Speaking of support, the wide receiver support on the New Orleans Saints roster right now might be amongst the best in the NFL. But outside of that claim, it's certainly better than it has been in the past. There's no doubt about that, right? You look at last year, the guys that were the starters last year are effectively your 3 main depth options, right? Your 3 most known depth options at this point going into 2022. And while a lot of attention has gone to the guys at the top, Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, and deservedly so, there are some other players that are making a push to potentially become the 5th or 6th wide receiver on the New Orleans Saints depth chart. Deontay Hardy has a very clear role as a returner, but also as a deep threat, somebody that can stretch the field for you. But if you wanted to really focus him in on his special teams ability, you're going to want to look for another deep threat on the team. And I often talk about Easop Winston as being that guy, especially with the sort of connection that he has with Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston likes to call him his cousin, calls him Cousin Winston. But there's another guy who's here, local to Dai'Jean, here in New Orleans, that you're going to want to know and that you're going to want to watch. Number 85, Kirk Merritt, because he will surprise you. He's surprised all of us so far throughout training camp. He's had a fantastic camp. And as I've said before, if it wasn't for the big storylines like Jameis Winston and Michael Thomas and Tyrann Mathieu and the phenomenal play of Paulson and Debo stealing away the sort of camp player of the year award so far this offseason, Kirk Merritt would probably be that guy. Every day he's making a big catch, or he's got a clear opportunity for what would be run after catch that gets cut short, of course, because it's practice. He's making plays in one-on-ones, right? He's making plays in 11 on 11s. He caught a touchdown in a 2-minute drill today from Andy Dalton on Tuesday. This guy is bringing it so far throughout camp. And it's not just us that realize it over on the media side. The New Orleans Saints are taking notice as well. Here's what Dennis Allen had to say about Kirk Merritt with one specific detail that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen a player that gradually has kind of caught my eye. Probably early on in the OTAs, I don't think he caught the ball as well as I would have liked. But then after 2 or 3 days, the next thing you know, he's making all these sideline toe tap catches. And so he's a guy that's caught my eye. I like his ability to run after the catch. So, look, we'll see. We'll get him out here in some game action and see what he can do.
The detail that I really enjoy there from Dennis Allen is the honesty around Kirk Merritt's development, that he's gotten better. When they saw him during OTAs, quote, didn't catch the ball the way I would have liked to have seen. And now you see him making all of these sideline catches, toe tap catches, all of this. So you're hearing Dennis Allen evaluate not just what he's doing now, but the way that he has grown over the course of the offseason already. So we're seeing sort of this polished product of Kirk Merritt. Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints have watched him go from maybe a shakier OTA performance to a very solid training camp performance. And that counts for something, right? That's certainly not for nothing. When you're able to show off your ability to be able to improve over the course of a very short amount of time. Remember, OTAs were not that long ago. And so now that you're into this August part of the calendar and you're into the training camp, you're able to show your development, your progress immediately on the field. Then all of a sudden, that shows your coachability. That shows how high your ceiling is. That shows the fact that you can raise your ceiling and the fact that you don't have a problem with like receiving adjustments and things like that, and that you allow them to make you better. So Kirk Merritt absolutely putting that on display. Dennis Allen also mentioned that he's looking forward to seeing him in some game action. He's not the only one. Ian Book had a similar sentiment as well. Here's what Ian Book had to say.
He's doing really good. Yeah. Just working with him again in OTAs and right now, his speed, we were talking about it yesterday. Nobody's getting a hand on him off the line. So you see it in one-on-ones today. You see it in team and 7-on-7. His speed is awesome. And then he always knows where to line up. He's never asking what the play. He knows everything. He's in the playbook. He works hard. You see him doing extra stuff daily. So it's paying off, and excited to play with him in the preseason too.
There you go. Another comment on the idea that they're excited to see him in the preseason. Ian Book excited to play alongside him in the preseason. Ian Book will probably see more preseason snaps this weekend than he saw in the entirety of the preseason last year, with that Arizona Cardinals preseason game getting canceled with the hurricane and everything that was going on around then with Hurricane Ida. And I think Ian Book took 24 total snaps in last year's preseason. He might get that in this game alone against the Houston Texans. And if he does, then you could expect to see some targets from Kirk Merritt, because clearly there's some trust there. Ian Book not only mentioning his speed and talking about his play style, but also talking about his smarts, right? He's not confused. He's not asking what the play is. He's in the playbook. He's getting all the extra work in. That's something that when a quarterback like Ian Book sees that from a receiver, like there's a lot of trust there in terms of what that can be. The other thing I'll mention, just to tie both comments together, Ian Book complimenting his speed and the fact that nobody's getting a hand on him off the line of scrimmage, which we've actually seen in practice. And if you don't get a hand on this guy at the line of scrimmage, he's blowing past you. And so the other piece there is what Dennis Allen said, was that he really enjoys his ability with the ball in his hands, his run after catch ability. So now you pair your ability to be able to immediately create separation off the line of scrimmage, your long speed once you get free and you get that defender behind you, and then what you can do once you have the ball in your hands. There's a lot of excitement there for the New Orleans Saints. There's a lot of excitement there when it comes to Kirk Merritt and what he might be able to produce in the preseason. And that becomes the key, because haven't we seen this before, right? We've certainly seen this before. A guy like Emmanuel Butler, who lights up training camp, but then gets out in the preseason and it's crickets, right? You have to be able to produce in-game action. And that's going to be the sort of difference when it comes to Kirk Merritt. Can he produce in the preseason? His quarterbacks are looking forward to playing along with him. His head coach is looking forward to seeing him out there. Now, can he rise to the occasion and do it? So don't forget about Kirk Merritt, number 85. And don't forget about our guy, Dai'Jean Dixon from Nicholls State as well, number 84. Both of those guys just continue to make plays. But Kirk Merritt is somebody that's drawing a lot of praise, a lot of excitement, a lot of it unsolicited as well. And so something to keep an eye out on as we creep closer and closer to the Saturday matchup against the Houston Texans. Will I be there? I'll give you all the updates on that as we continue on here. But we're also going to get to your questions from our live show earlier today. from Locked On Saints, including the breakout candidate of the year in 2022 after a couple of weeks of camp. We're going to get to all that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode with your questions from our live show earlier today, our post-training camp live show. Do want to give you a quick programming update. However, Thursday I'm going to be doing I'm going to be present for the remote for ESPN Radio NOLA, where is it? It's at Francesca's. So I'll be there for that right after camp. So the live show might be a little bit late on Thursday. That one might push to closer to 4 p.m. as opposed to around 2 or 3 p.m., which is what I've been trying to do. I know it was a little late today, but just a heads up about that. And then a quick update for you in terms of my travel schedule. I am not going to be going to Houston this weekend. I decided to move those dates. Instead of me going to Houston, which would be covering a game that you can all see, I'm instead going to just take that trip and bump it a few days later, and then I'll be at the Green Bay Packers joint practices next week, the Tuesday and Wednesday. So I'll make sure that I'm there to give you the updates from practice, because you don't get to see practice, right? You get to see the games, but you don't get to see practice. So I thought it would make more sense for me to be at practice so I can bring you those updates, and that would be more of value to you. If I'm an idiot, let me know, but that's what I think I'm going to do. And I hope you like it because I bought the tickets. Okay, so let's jump into our questions here when it comes to from our live show earlier today. We got a few. Again, some of these I'm going to go through quickly. Some of them are going to be a little bit longer. This one will go pretty quick. Tito Man 24, my boy, he asked, question, who will have a breakout year in 2022? So far right now, my breakout candidate going into 2022 is Adam Troutman on the offensive side and Peyton Turner on the defensive side. I think Marcus Davenport can be that guy too. We just haven't seen him out on the field yet. But, Adam Troutman had a big catch down the seam that would have been a touchdown, but the official blew the play dead. And Peyton Turner has just been a man with his hair on fire so far all throughout camp. So those are two guys that I'm watching as breakout stars going into 2022. I could throw Paulson Adebo in there as well. He certainly has a lot to do there, but he was so good last year too. Peyton Turner, we didn't really get to see, so I'll just put Peyton Turner a little bit above that, but either one of those guys is shaping up for it for sure. Next up, we've got Ransom Antoine, who said, if Davenport gets hit with the injury bug again and Peyton Turner plays well, do the Saints consider trading Davenport while he still has value? That's a complicated question, because if he gets hit with the injury bug again, does he have value? Like in that scenario, he loses his value, and so trading him would be challenging. And you only have one more year to trade him, right? So you'd have to trade him before the trade deadline in that case. And so if the injury bug hits him and you trade him, like you can't really trade him at that point. So that's where that becomes a little bit challenging. So I think that the timeline to make the decision to trade Marcus Davenport has probably come and gone. I don't think that's going to happen at this point any longer. And so as of right now, he's on the physically unable to perform list, or he's now off that list. So you might have to trade him before the season if you wanted to do that, but I don't see the Saints doing that. And at this point, the ship has kind of already sailed. So your hope instead is that both Marcus Davenport and Peyton Turner get to play this season, and that the two of them stay on the field, are consistent, which both of them mentioned that consistency and health are big goals of theirs going into 2022. Matt Rhea has certainly had his impact on those guys. And then, Cam Jordan on the opposite side, that those guys just wreak havoc all throughout the 2022 season. So I would let go of the idea of hoping that the Saints could potentially move Marcus Davenport and get something back, and instead start hoping that Marcus Davenport gives them a reason to give him a contract by the end of the season. Let's go to T-Ray 504. How will the trainers impact the injury bug this year that plagued the Saints all last year? So this is kind of what I alluded to with Matt Rhea. Matt Rhea has made a big difference. I asked Tony Jones Jr. a little bit about sort of his experience with Matt Rhea and how it's happened. And he talked about how this guy's improved his quality of life outside of the game of football by bringing science into the equation and sort of helping them learn things about their body. I can't remember one of the offensive linemen, though. I think it was Landon Turner or Landon Young. I do that all the time. Offensive line. He's my offensive line Lucas / Nick Kroll. I just keep calling him things he's not. Anyway, talking about the bilateral work, working one half of the body, the other half of the body to figure out where there are deficiencies and where you're compensating for things and stuff like that. So, this is a team that was ready to buy into some innovation. Mickey Loomis talked about the value that he's brought as well before training camp even started, and just this idea that they wanted to bring something new to the conversation when it came to health and conditioning and strength and conditioning. And certainly Rhea has brought that. So I think that's really what you're looking for, is you're looking at a guy that has, that reduced Alabama Crimson Tide's soft tissue injuries by 50% once they bought into his practices. The Saints very ready to buy into his practices, and everyone has given nothing but glowing reviews of the training staff, the conditioning staff, and the athletic staff over the course of this training camp. Let's get to a couple from West Bank Rick real quick. I'm just going to say Will Lutz, but you all know the nickname. Well, so far Will Lutz has been, let me make sure I get this number right. I'm fairly sure that I have this number right off the top of my head, but I also don't want to screw it up. But to my recollection, as I look through my notes, Will Lutz, I believe, is 22 of 23 kicking field goals in camp so far. And his only miss was a 57-yarder that he tried and came up a little bit short on, if I remember correctly. And then he kind of reset it up with Blake Gillikin a couple of moments later and kind of unofficially kicked it a second time. And when he did that, it actually he made it. So you can kind of give it like a little bit of an asterisk there too. I'm having trouble finding my notes there, but anyway, I'm pretty sure he's 22 of 23. He's somewhere in the 20s, and he's only missed one kick so far. That's the way that I'll say it. So he's been really, really outstanding so far this offseason, and what a just relief to see a field goal kicker out there that already has sort of that operation down from snap to hold to kick. There's no question marks in terms of how do you like the ball to be held? How do you like your hold? How do you like your snaps? Like all these other things. Like that's just a well-oiled machine right there, those guys. And it's really good to see them back together. Westbrook Rick's second question. How was the offensive line and passing protection? I would like to know who the weakest link is in the starting lineup. So I think right now we have to wait. And the reason why I said that we have to wait to answer that question is because we haven't really seen Ryan Ramczyk out there. We've seen Landon Turner at right tackle for the most part. Now we got to see a lot of Trevor Penning on Tuesday because James Hurst had a light day. So that meant that Trevor Penning got a lot of opportunities, and we didn't really see any sacks in team drills and stuff like that until the second or third team got out there. So I think that's going well so far in terms of pass protection. But this was also a non-contact practice, a non-padded practice. We've only gotten about 5 padded practices so far, so it's really, really hard to give a full evaluation of the offensive line. If I was going to say that there was any type of weak link right now, it's going to simply be communication as a whole. It's not necessarily any one player. It's just that we're not really seeing the starting 5 at all at this point, but it's still very early. There's weeks until we have a month until the regular season kicks off, a month and a couple of days. So that will become more clear after a little while, but right now, I wouldn't say that there's anything so massively concerning off of the starting lineup, because if there was, I promise you would hear about it. So I think Doug Marrone, Zach Strief, Jari Evans, those guys doing a really, really great job. And finally, Brad27 here said, do you think that the Saints will keep a fullback on the roster this year, or do you think that they drop the fullback to make space or room to keep an extra receiver or other player? So I think that the Saints will do something interesting with their roster to keep an extra player at another position, but I think it's going to happen at quarterback. There's a chance the Saints only keep 2 quarterbacks this offseason, or this season, knowing that Taysom Hill is kind of their emergency quarterback, not their backup quarterback, but their emergency quarterback if they have absolutely no other options to go to. And then you can get Ian Book back on the practice squad, and that gives you an opportunity to also have Ian Book as your emergency quarterback as well on a week-to-week basis. So I think that the fullback question is an interesting one, though, because fullback has been an extension and a part of the New Orleans Saints offense since Sean Payton's been in the building. And so they're one of the few teams, along with maybe like the Washington Commanders, the Detroit Lions, and maybe the Denver Broncos, and probably the Kansas City Chiefs and San Francisco 49ers that use fullbacks, right? That's kind of the list. And so I have asked a couple of players about how they like running behind a fullback, and they've all been very excited about it. We actually saw in Monday's practice the first team rep that was an Adam Prentice carry up the middle. So I do think that the fullback is going to stick around in this year's offense. My hope is at least for that. I root for the fullback position quite a bit. And I think Adam Prentice is such a fantastic lead blocker. He's often been noted on every team that he's been on as an extra offensive lineman out on the field too. So I think that they will keep the fullback. And then if they want to make space for another position, that they might do it at quarterback by only keeping 2 rather than 3. But we'll see how that all breaks down over the course of time. Remember, the New Orleans Saints will cut down from 90 to 85 after that first game. So maybe we get a little bit of an answer to that question once we see sort of what the rhythm of those cuts are. All right, y'all, coming up tomorrow, right after practice on Wednesday, we will be right here at the Locked On Saints YouTube page. We'll be live, and then it will, of course, be published all across so that wherever you are, however you take in the podcast, you'll have that episode to check out, and then we'll get to our evening show later on that day. I appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out that Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get all the information that you need with fantasy drafts on the way. Vinny Iyer over at Locked On Fantasy Football, Ryan, Matt, Kate, and Marcus over at Locked On Dynasty. They've got everything that you need to make sure you're all set up for your fantasy football seasons. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to the show and me. I will see you tomorrow. And of course, for everything else you need in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.